Stunning, Andrew. After all this time, the jury, I say, and I think you agree, they got it right.
The only just outcome, the only outcome consistent with the evidence and the law in this case. It was never a close call if we got a fair and impartial jury who applied the law as instructed to the actual evidence in this case. This was the prosecution alone was a horrific
Andrew,
miscarriage of justice.
Just to interrupt
put this poor kid through this process.
Forgive me for interrupting you. Kyle Rittenhouse just fell to his knees in tears. He's on his knees. His lawyer's talking to him. He's shaking. It's upsetting to watch. It's like I feel like the media is just so awful, Andrew. They've been so disgusting from the beginning, and you can feel what this boy is feeling. This young man, his mother's in tears behind him. We forget people's humanity in the press. We just want to kill them. We want to go for the jugular. We want everyone to pay. And in this case, we wanted him to pay because he was a Trump supporter and he was a Second Amendment supporter and he wasn't on the side of the BLM rioters. And the media and the president and the governor put this kid through hell. And this is the only just verdict. Back to you.
They had nothing close to a conviction on this case. And they threatened this kid with life in prison, an 18-year-old kid with life in prison, no possibility of early release. And they had no evidence that was close to disproving self-defense. It's despicable. And the machinations that the prosecution went through to try to build a case out of nothing to put this kid in jail for the rest of his life, it's contemptible.
That's the thing people need to remember. This is not a case that was close. We all started to wonder, right? Because they took so long, the jurors took so long. But this was not a close case. This is a case that never should have been brought. The videotapes showed the story. You just had to believe your own eyes and ears and not the liars in the press and the politicians trying to get elected off of racial division. Right, because this was based on his presence there that night was based on the shooting of Jacob Blake, who was a black man by a white cop, which was ruled legally justified, including by this sitting president's DOJ. But it was all there, black and white. The charges never should have been brought. This wasn't a close case.
No, not even close. There was literally zero evidence inconsistent with self-defense in this case. The state's own witnesses' testimony was consistent with lawful self-defense for every one of these criminal counts.
No one's going to do any soul searching. The media won't stop. They're probably trying to hunt down the jurors again right now, although it's different once the trial's over than during the course of the trial. And the judge has to worry. Kyle Rittenhouse still has to worry for his safety because of all the irresponsible coverage. They've all received serious death threats.
Well, it doesn't surprise me. I mean, the left is violent, right? The whole premise of these events was because they were burning down the city of Kenosha over the false narrative around Jacob Blake in the first place. Now I guess we see what they do. I mean, there's 500 National Guard standing outside the town, I suppose. Are they going to burn Kenosha down again because they're angry about this just verdict? I fear for the town of Kenosha. And it's not a big town, folks. It's a small town in America.
Mm-hmm. And I fear for this judge and for Kyle and the defense attorneys. The judge and the defense attorneys were literally just doing their jobs. This is how our system works. And the system is stacked against a defendant, white or black. Folks, the system's stacked against the defendant. When you go into that courthouse with the weight of the state coming down against you, the prosecutor comes in there with an air of authority that's very hard to pierce. And that's why due process is so important and adherence to the rules is so important. And the prosecutors have a higher calling and an expectation to pursue justice and not just a conviction because they have so much power. And so for them to now be demonized, I mean, there was a piece. Oh, gosh, I think it was Charles Blow writing in the New York Times saying something like this judge made rulings as though Kyle Rittenhouse was his grandson that he had to look at. Nonsense. There was prosecutorial misconduct for which they were rightly called out.
Absolutely. And by the way, this judge did not make particularly favorable rulings for this defendant. All those motions for mistrials with prejudice should have been granted on the merits. The judge put off making those decisions in the hope that there would be an acquittal and he wouldn't have to make the call. And it looks like he got his wish. Thank God we got the acquittals and he got his wish. But this was not a judge that was eager to make decisions in favor of this defendant.
And he's notoriously especially protective of defendants' rights. Long before he ever heard the name Kyle Rittenhouse, he has a reputation for bending over backwards to protect the defendants who are in his courtroom, as it should be. What do you want, a judge? I mean, even people who are more prosecution oriented in general, like I am, do I want a judge who's more prosecution oriented? Absolutely not. The system's already stacked in favor of the prosecutor. It shouldn't be stacked the other way. And I agree with you. He doesn't seem to particularly like Mr. Binger, but you could understand why. Mr. Binger had done several irresponsible things. And so the judge got angry with him a few times, but then came out before the trial was over and defended all the lawyers involved in the case.
Well, he has to work with all these people again, right? You want to maintain I guess, looking forward, a professional relationship with all these people. But frankly, there's no question in my mind, Binger should have been sanctioned for no other reason than referencing Kyle having asserted his Fifth Amendment, right? And mentioning it in front of the jury, which, folks, for those of you who are not lawyers, you just do not do that. That does not happen. That right is sacrosanct, and you cannot have that right to remain silent used against you in a court of law. Period. It may not even be mentioned, and a career prosecutor knows this. That was no mistake. That was intentional. Exactly right.
And also trying to bring in evidence that he knew he was banned from bringing in. The court had said, I'm inclined to disallow that. Don't go near that without asking me. And he jumped into it with both feet, trying to suggest that Kyle had a prior incident with a gun that had been suggested that it was going to be ruled inadmissible. So the prejudice that was stacking up against Kyle Rittenhouse from the beginning was enormous. And that's not even discussing things like the video, the jurors being videotaped, the MSNBC reporter following the jurors when they knew they had no business doing that. And that's been ruled misconduct in the past. The intimidation of the jurors with the protesters on the courthouse steps, on it goes. And I have to say, this jury was very brave.
I think so. I mean, they were obviously facing tremendous pressure, certainly media pressure, social pressure. There's no social win for them by voting for acquittal. It could only be negative because the right doesn't attack people for simply delivering a verdict in court. That's what the left does. So the only threat was from the left, and they hung in there. I presume we're going to find out there was one juror probably hanging out. That's why we're in our fourth day of deliberations. I presume that's the juror who wanted to take the jury instructions home yesterday. I think what must have happened is they were the only holdout. The other jurors said, listen, you do whatever you need to do, but we're not voting guilty on any of these charges. So take the jury instructions home, sleep on it. If you need to, come back here tomorrow. If you can't also vote for acquittal, we're a hung jury because we're not going into the Thanksgiving week in this courtroom.
Mm-hmm. It seems like there had to be a holdout for it to take this long, right? This many hours, this many days. It's hard to believe that for each one of those hours, they were going over each case, each shooting, Rosenbaum, Grosskreutz, Huber, and Jump Kick Man, who wasn't shot, but shot at. That wouldn't have taken this long. I mean, I can't think of a world in which that would have taken this long. So somebody seems to have been a holdout. Again, speculative. We'll find out if one of the jurors decides to speak. And we're told that they are allowed to if they now so choose. The normal way it works, I looked it up actually in Wisconsin at some point, and it was, I believe, you're supposed to, as counsel, submit your request to the court. And the court will then let the jury know. Of course, hey, guess what? The media wants to speak with you. And then it's up to the jurors whether they want to do that or not. And listen, they may not want to. They may not want to, Branca, given, and I'm calling you Branca now, given the way, the number of threats that have already been leveled in this case.
I think most of the jurors will not want to. I expect, if we're right and in thinking there was one holdout, I suspect it was the jury foreperson, juror number 54. But I suspect whoever that one holdout is will want to talk, because what tends to happen in these situations is, their social circle would have been against acquittal. They voted for acquittal anyway. Obviously, it has to be a unanimous decision, this acquittal. Now they have to go back to their social environment and kind of explain it away. And what we typically see happen is they'll come up with excuses. They'll say, if only I had known this evidence that wasn't admitted, or if only I had known that, I would have voted. I was misled somehow by the court process. So they can take the heat off themselves for having voted for acquittal within their social circle and place it someplace else. And to do that, they want to explain how it was that this, what they'll characterize afterwards as a mistake, happened. But that's fine. I don't care about any of that.
I don't think they have it here.
Solid. Kyle Rittenhouse is free of any claim of criminal liability in this case. And that's the outcome that I expected. I had hoped for it the first day. Frankly, I thought the defense in their closing argument should have made clear to the jurors that, listen, you have 36 pages of jury instructions. You have to decide how to use them, but we encourage you to start with self-defense first, because if you find self-defense, nothing else matters, and you can be home in time for lunch.
Well, what a critical ruling that was, Andrew, where the defense did get the judge to rule that if to instruct the jury, if you find he shot, Rosenbaum, Grosskreutz, Huber in self-defense, you can stop. You need not consider the lesser included charges. Like if it was self-defense on intentional murder, it was self-defense on every lesser charge underneath intentional murder. Your job is done. And that was big.
Well, it's for each count. So for each person, you'd have to find self-defense separately. Each person had lesser included. So if you found self-defense for each count at any level, then all the rest went away. But they did have to find self-defense 5 times. And they did.
When they were going down the list and they, by the time they got to Gage Grosskreutz, you knew it was going to be another not guilty, because like that one was such a slam dunk. Right. If they had found him guilty on that, it just would have been such a stunner. So it became kind of clear. And Kyle Rittenhouse, you could see, my gosh, his reaction. In fact, we have it teed up again for our listening audience. Here it is. And for our viewing audience, you can see it again on youtube.com/Megyn Kelly when we post it later. Watch.
Kyle Rittenhouse. As to the first count of the information, Joseph Rosenbaum. We, the jury, find the defendant, Kyle H. Rittenhouse, not guilty. As to the second count of the information, Richard McGinnis, we, the jury, find the defendant, Kyle H. Rittenhouse, not guilty. As to the third count of the information, unknown male, we, the jury, find the defendant, Kyle H. Rittenhouse, not guilty. As to the fourth count of the information, Anthony Huber, we, the jury, find the defendant, Kyle H. Rittenhouse, not guilty. As to the fifth count of the information, Gage Grosskreutz, we, the jury, find the defendant, Kyle H. Rittenhouse, not guilty.
Members of the jury, are these your unanimous verdicts? Is there anyone who does not agree with the verdicts as read? Would you wish the jury pulled?
Him falling to his knees is such a moment. He's grabbing, for the listening audience, his tie, his chest, almost as if it feels constricted.